Chapter 1, The Silent Laughter. In the sleepy town of Willowbrook, there was a small, unremarkable kindergarten tucked away at the end of Elm Street. By day, it was a place filled with bright laughter, tiny footsteps, and colorful drawings that lined the walls. But by night, the building took on a different persona. Its bright windows turned dark, and the once warm air felt heavy and cold, as if the very walls absorbed the life that filled it during the day. Miss Ellen Weaver, the head teacher, had stayed late that evening. It wasn't unusual for her to be the last to leave, tidying up the toys, wiping paint from tables, and making sure everything was perfect for the next day. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thick, and the usual comforting hum of the building was replaced by an eerie stillness. The sun had already dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows through the windows. As she locked the final cabinet, a soft giggle echoed down the hallway. Ellen froze, her hand still on the key. "Hello?" she called, her voice sounding too loud in the empty building. There was no answer, only the quiet settling of the building. She told herself it was her imagination, just the echoes of the day's activities still lingering in her mind. Children's laughter often filled the air here, it wasn't unusual for it to cling to the walls, right? But then she heard it again. This time, it was closer, as if a child was hiding just out of sight, playing a game with her. Goosebumps prickled along her arms, and her throat tightened. Slowly, she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting brief moments of darkness along her path. She reached the playroom, the source of the giggle, and pushed the door open. Inside, everything was as it should be. The small chairs were neatly tucked under their tiny tables, the toy boxes closed, and the art supplies packed away. Yet something felt off. The room was cold, far colder than it should have been. Her eyes scanned the room, her heart racing. She noticed something strange. The rocking horse in the corner, one of the children's favorites, was gently swaying back and forth. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't touched it. No one had been here since the last child left hours ago. Yet there it was, moving on its own. The soft creak of the wood echoed in the silence. And then she saw it. In the mirror hanging on the far wall, just for a moment, she saw a small figure, a child, standing behind her, watching. She spun around, but the room was empty. The laughter came again, louder now, closer. Miss Weaver ran from the room, her heart pounding in her chest, but the laughter followed her, echoing in the empty halls of the kindergarten, as if the building itself had come alive. Chapter 2, The Forgotten Child. The next morning, Miss Weaver arrived at the kindergarten early, still shaken from the events of the previous night. She hadn't been able to sleep, her mind replaying the eerie giggles and the shadowy figure she thought she'd seen. She tried to rationalize it, maybe she was just overtired, maybe the stress of the upcoming school event was getting to her. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. As the children arrived one by one, their laughter and chatter filled the building, dispelling some of the lingering unease. For a while, it almost seemed normal. Almost. Until lunchtime. As the children sat around their tables eating their sandwiches and fruit, Miss Weaver noticed something strange. A child she didn't recognize sat at one of the back tables, alone. He was a small boy, no older than 5, with pale skin and dark hair that fell over his eyes. His clothes were old-fashioned, out of place compared to the bright, modern outfits of the other children. She frowned. There hadn't been a new student enrolled this week. She would have known. She made her way over to him, her heart beating faster with every step. "Hello there," she said, kneeling down to his level. "I don't think I've met you yet. What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. He just stared at her, his eyes dark and unreadable beneath his mop of hair. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. A chill ran down her spine. She glanced around, but none of the other children seemed to notice him. It was as if he didn't exist in their world. "Are you lost?" She tried again, her voice softer, more tentative. Still, the boy said nothing. He simply stood up, walked slowly toward the door, and disappeared around the corner. Miss Weaver quickly followed him, but when she turned the corner, The hallway was empty. The boy was gone, as if he had never been there at all. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. This wasn't normal. This wasn't her imagination. Something was wrong with the kindergarten. Chapter 3, The Whispering Walls. That night, Miss Weaver couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The image of the strange boy haunted her thoughts, his pale face and empty eyes lingering in her mind. She tried to convince herself that it was just a strange coincidence, but deep down, she knew better. After the children left and the building was once again silent, Miss Weaver decided to investigate. She couldn't keep ignoring what was happening. Something was wrong with this place, and she needed to know what. Armed with a flashlight, she wandered through the darkened halls of the kindergarten, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the building itself was waiting, watching. As she passed by the playroom, the door creaked open on its own, as if inviting her in. Her pulse quickened, but she pushed through the fear and stepped inside. The room was bathed in the dim glow of the flashlight, casting long shadows over the toys and furniture. The rocking horse stood still in the corner, but Miss Weaver kept her distance. She knew better than to trust the stillness. And then she heard it, faint, almost too quiet to notice at first. A whisper. It came from the walls, soft and insistent, like a child's voice calling out from behind the plaster. "Come play with me!" Her blood ran cold. The voice was soft, pleading, but there was something off about it, something hollow and wrong. She pressed her ear to the wall, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Don't leave! Stay! Play!" Miss Weaver pulled back, her heart racing. The air in the room grew colder, and she could feel it now, the presence of something watching her, just beyond the veil of reality. Suddenly, the toys in the room began to move. Slowly at first, but then faster, blocks stacked themselves, a doll's head turned to face her, and the rocking horse began to creak back and forth on its own. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices now, all calling to her, begging her to stay, to play. "Stay with us!" She stumbled out of the room, her breath coming in panicked gasps. But the whispers followed her, growing louder, chasing her down the hallway. Chapter 4, The Unseen Playmates. The next day, Miss Weaver arrived at the kindergarten with a sense of dread. The strange events from the night before weighed heavily on her mind, but she had no choice but to carry on. The children needed her. But something was wrong. From the moment the children arrived, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, darker. The children seemed more subdued than usual, their usual bright chatter replaced with hushed whispers. And then she noticed it. Several of the children were talking to someone who wasn't there. At first, she thought they were just playing pretend, imaginary friends were common at their age. But as she watched, she realized they were interacting with someone, something, unseen. They whispered to the air, their eyes following invisible figures as they played. One little girl, Sarah, sat alone in the corner, speaking quietly to someone Miss Weaver couldn't see. "Who are you talking to, Sarah?" Miss Weaver asked, kneeling beside her. "My friend," Sarah said simply, not looking up. Miss Weaver's stomach twisted. "What's your friend's name?" Sarah paused, as if listening to something only she could hear. "He doesn't have a name. He just wants to play." Miss Weaver's heart pounded in her chest. "Where is he now?" Sarah pointed to the empty corner of the room. "He's waiting." Chapter 5, The Lullaby of Shadows. That night, the kindergarten stood silent once more, its windows dark, its halls empty. But inside, the walls whispered, the shadows moved, and the forgotten children played, waiting for the next to arrive.